I'm Hub Arkish, inviting you to kick off your football season right with Pro Football Weekly's Football Legends Live. One night only, Saturday, September 8th at 7 p.m. at the Rouse Center in Crystal Lake. It features Pro Football Hall of Fame legends Brian Urlacher, Mean Joe Green, Lawrence Taylor, Dan Hampton, Anthony Munoz, and Randy White, plus appearances from some of the greatest Bears to ever play on the Chicago gridiron. Join the PFW crew and me for one unforgettable evening. Get tickets and info now at ProFootballWeekly.com for Football Legends Live, Saturday, September 8th, presented by Rumchata and Centegra Health System.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Pro Football Weekly podcast. My name is Dan Mott, and we thank you for being with us once again this week. I'm alongside Arthur Arkish and Eric Edholm. Guys, we're trying out a video podcast this week, so I want to thank you guys for putting on some clothes this week.
And showering.
I didn't shower, actually, but I am dressed. It's a shame the bosses didn't listen when we told them we really have faces for podcasting, not for video podcasting, so we apologize in advance.
Well, if you are listening to us via iTunes or Blog Talk Radio, you can find the video version of this podcast over at ProFootballWeekly.com. Guys, we have a lot to discuss today. The rest of the league's preseason games started up this week. We're taping this Friday morning, so there are a few games Friday evening as well as Saturday evening. But nonetheless, guys, it was a pretty fun start to the preseason, wouldn't you say, Arthur?
Yeah, absolutely. Baker Mayfield debut, I know we'll talk about a little bit more. Shaquem Griffin, some great stories among this rookie class for sure. And then you had some healthy returns. I know Andrew Luck was on Eric Edholm's radar. And for preseason one, I was actually quite entertained Thursday night. How
about you, Eric?
I hated it. I absolutely despise. No, I didn't want to just agree with everybody. Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, we had action before kickoff. Even we had a little skirmish there with Cam Newton and Calvin Benjamin. We had some pretty interesting stuff with the anthem stuff, and yeah, I mean, most preseason, the real day one, not the Hall of Fame game. I think everybody gets a little more excited, but we actually had some things that we can talk about in a concrete fashion.
Well, we'll get to more of these games and kind of break down some of these storylines later on in the show. Plus, we'll talk about the incentives to Tom Brady's contract. We'll chat about the Hard Knocks premiere this week, some of the Vikings adversities, and other news from around the league. But I know Eric just mentioned it. Guys, I want to start on the freshest news, which came across my notifications this morning, and that is, you guessed it, more National Anthem protesting news. We've been starting the show off the past few weeks with back and forth on this issue and how the league is handling it. And then following some players taking a knee during the preseason games, our president reignited his feud with the NFL, blasting players on Twitter and suggesting the players should be suspended without pay. Eric, how do you suppose the league will end as the saga continues?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the good news is that the talks with the players' union remain. They remain in contact, and they're trying to hammer out a solution. And it's obviously become a problem that they've created themselves. The NFL has, with this anthem policy that they thought was going to quiet Trump. All it's done, as you said, is kind of ignite him a little bit. The players we're talking about right now, 2,000 different players. Each of them maybe have a different view on this thing, or a different perspective, or a different approach to how they're going to address it. We did see two Dolphins players, you said, Kenny Stills and Albert Wilson, participate in kneeling during the anthem, and some Jaguars players showing their support for the movement and all that. So it's a bit fractured. Some teams are doing one thing, others are doing another, and yet the NFL issues this statement, kind of basically saying, the policy still exists based on the way we rewrote it in May. However, at this time, we're not punishing anybody. So nothing has really changed yet, but there's at least the hope that, they can come to some kind of agreement here.
Arthur, I know that there's been some scuffles earlier this week happening in Minnesota as wide receiver Stephon Diggs and cornerback Xavier Rhodes got into it earlier in the week and were barred from Wednesday's afternoon practice. They returned on Thursday, and Diggs said, quote, "Brothers argue, brothers fight, we go at it, but at the end of the day, we still love each other." Is there a real concern here, or can this be just chalked up to tempers flaring in the moment during a hard practice?
Dan, I have some concerns with the Vikings that I didn't have as recently as a few weeks ago, but they have nothing to do with Stephon Diggs and Xavier Rhodes going at it at practice. I'm guessing Rhodes just wasn't happy to see Stephon Diggs get $8 million more guaranteed in that wide receiver contract than Rhodes got it this time last season. But no, those are two competitive dudes and two, obvious on their second contracts with the Vikings. They're two core pieces of the puzzle. My concern and why I had teed this up as a something worth discussing is the offensive line issue for the Vikings right now is troubling. It was troubling maybe to enter the season, but then after the tragic passing of Tony Sperano and now some injuries, their starting left guard Nick Easton just placed on injured reserve. Pat Elflein, starting center, still on the PUP list. Right guard Joe Berger retired in the offseason. So that entire interior is in flux. And again, I get back to Tony Sperano because I've talked to some people who say the Vikings are going to miss him more. Of course, they're going to miss him. He died too soon. It was an unspeakable tragedy. I just mean from a football context that they're going to miss him more than anyone else that's disappeared this offseason. And now when you throw in all these moving parts along the offensive line that he so masterfully handled last year in their great transformation, I've got some legit concerns when you look at what Kirk Cousins does with the stable offensive line versus what he does when it's not quite as secure. It's pretty telling. I wrote a column yesterday at Pro Football Weekly I'd like people to check out, but I'm just wondering if Minnesota's going to have a hard time protecting their $84 million investment here.
Eric, in New England, they will add $5 million in performance-based incentives to quarterback Tom Brady's contract by this weekend. A source told ESPN's Adam Schefter on Thursday. Is this pocket change to Brady? Do these incentives really entice him to stay in the league longer?
Well, it's $5 million. I don't care if you're E.F. Hutton or the guy selling hot dogs down the street. That's a lot of money. So obviously, I think. We'll find out more details about the contract and everything. And basically, incentives are done in two forms. There's likely to be earned, which is, let's say, starting 16 games, which Brady's done a lot, or unlikely to be earned, and the effect is on the cap. So obviously, if they're filed under the unlikely to be earned, something like, ranking in the top 5 in passing yards or something like that, and the NFL has these stipulations, that's going to affect next year's cap as opposed to this one. So this is a financial move, but more than anything, it reminds everybody that the Patriots aren't on as bad terms, especially Brady and Belichick and Robert Kraft and whoever, as everybody may think they are. You've got Belichick giving Brady kind of extra rest during the preseason. Now maybe he's had this little back injury that the Boston Globe's talking about. You have now the team giving Brady a $5 million bump to his salary, potentially. He may not earn every dollar of that. You have Belichick and Gronk posing for pictures and smiles on their face. So, I don't think we should make too much about the relations between Brady and the Patriots or Gronk and the Patriots or Belichick and Kraft or any of that stuff. To me, that's sort of the biggest takeaway from this thing is that it sounds like Belichick has kind of met Brady halfway a little bit here, and he's getting a nice potential little financial boon to tack on top for all the stuff he's done for this team.
Guys, I want to get into a little bit of a Hard Knocks chatter. I know Eric at home wrote a fantastic piece on this week's premiere over at ProFootballWeekly.com, and a lot to discuss, I think, from that show. I know that several people who have written about it have just talked about how this is maybe one of the best that we've seen in years. And Arthur, I'll start with you kind of on your takeaways from this. I know that I really enjoyed this first episode, and I've watched several of the past years, and this one just stood out to me as just a really fun one to watch.
Well, there's all these great built-in storylines, right? It's the Browns, of course, the punchline of the NFL, and you got Hugh Jackson coming back from 0-16, an arranged marriage with John Dorsey, who's clearly going to be kind of this odd character on television, probably just like he is in real life. He's a little bit of a different, strange bird. But then you got all these huge personalities in the top pick, Baker Mayfield, who doesn't even end up, as I think Eric put it, as like a top 5 storyline in bringing in his RV, and the quarterback-only RV in the parking lot at the Browns facility is great. You got a couple, maybe lesser-known dudes, Carl Nassib and Carl Nassib, I believe it is, excuse me. And, even Jarvis Landry, I know he got the big bucks and put up some big numbers and down in Miami, but I'm going to let Eric talk about the speech. He is now officially a Hard Knocks legend already, one episode in. And then again, I'm going to let Eric hit on it, but I just think the realism in sort of the pulling back the curtain and seeing what these NFL players and coaches in particular deal with. I thought Hard Knocks did just a tremendous job capturing that in the first episode for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Hugh Jackson is already embattled with this unbelievable, historically bad record, 1-31. He loses his brother, days before training camp, and then his mother dies during the first few days of camp. What an unbelievable tragedy. Two tragedies happened back to back. And, oh, by the way, he's got to fix his football team. People will have sympathy for him. There's no question about that. But he's also going to win. He's in self-preservation mode. So you can only imagine what is swirling through his head and the emotional roller coaster he's been through the last month or so. And to see it play out on the Hard Knocks camera. I mean, I wrote about how, Jackson was careful not to say too much about Josh Gordon's absence, and he was aware of the cameras at this point or that point. But in this moment, with his hands buried in his face, he just couldn't hold back. These were the rawest of emotions that I think we've, almost ever seen on this show. And so, yeah, it's going to be fascinating this year. There's talk about Des Bryant visiting. We'll see that in a future episode, perhaps. You've got the whole Josh Gordon sideshow, not sideshow, but I mean the side story angle there. He's not in camp right now. Oh, by the way, Baker Mayfield, Tyrod Taylor, everything else that's going on, the Antonio Callaway story. We had Corey Coleman was traded. We'll see that in episode 2. So many story angles. We can't wait to uncover all of them. And you're right, they played out well in the first preseason game.
Is this a real glimpse into this sort of, hard knock leadership that these coaches have to have for their players? And even in times when you have, just horrible things happening in your life, that you still got to hold it together for your team? Or, is this just how Hugh Jackson needs to handle this, to get through this? I just was curious in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's no different from what Mike Zimmer's trying – well, it's different. But, it's the same sort of vein of Zimmer trying to rally his team with the loss of a friend and a mentor and a fellow coach with Tony Sperano. It's the same thing Bill Belichick did a decade ago when his father died in the middle of the season. It's the same thing when Tony Dungy's son died. These are real-life moments that you can never prepare for. Coaches are always saying, expect the unexpected. Well, look, nobody can ever prepare for these situations. So it takes a really hard job coaching an NFL team and just magnifies it that much more. And he's got a young squad. He's got a team that's in need of learning. He's got a coaching staff that's been cobbled together. There's just so much on Hugh Jackson's plate right now. You have sympathy for his losses, but you also have concern that he and the rest of the staff are going to be able to pull it all together.
And if I could just add to that, I think one more really good storyline that Eric just hit on a little bit, this coaching staff, perhaps maybe even Hugh's replacement, some people think, in Todd Haley, and it only took about a half hour for us to see a little bit of headbutting, and then Hugh making sure he tried to insert his dominance, and then Todd Haley stepping back a little bit, but probably thinking in his head. And Eric had a great point. Hugh almost, in Eric's review, he writes that maybe Hugh forgot for a minute Todd Haley's a former head coach who actually waxed the Raiders back in 2013 when he was with the Chiefs. So John Dorsey and Todd Haley have a pre-existing relationship. Obviously, Hugh Jackson is the epitome of lame duck coach. I mean, all due respect for what he's dealing with personally, that's just a fact football-wise, and really fascinating to see already the back and forth, this dynamic involved in the episode as well.
Arthur, are you using any kind of financial advice from what's his name that was up there giving all this financial advice to these guys during the practice?
I'm not. No. Well, I don't have that type of money to just sit and put in a checking account and hope that his funny math seems to add up. That's Carl Nassib, the second year, maybe third year defensive end for the Browns. But no, he was a surprising star of the episode with all of his F-bombs and his just, again, ridiculous math, trying to be a financial advisor to his teammates. So I'll keep listening, but I think I'm going to seek my financial advice elsewhere. At least I can say that thus far.
Bro, it's crazy. That's what he said. Bro, You just put your money in, you get 10% compound interest every year, man. We're going to be billionaires. I mean, if you didn't enjoy that part of the show, I worry about, whatever lithium you've been fed recently, because that was great stuff.
It was pretty funny. Hey, I got to ask you, though, Eric, the defensive end, the colorful one that we expected to see, I would imagine, is Myles Garrett. He's going to come out of his shell, right? I mean, he's got a big personality. We didn't see much of it in the first episode.
Yeah, other than a little, one-on-one session with Willie McGinnis, I can't remember too much from him. I'm sure this was carefully edited, and they're holding some stuff back. I know HBO will do, pre-interviews with some of the players and follow them around off the field and stuff like that. Yeah, the coolest thing we saw on the defensive side of the ball was Christian Kirksey, who, on the one hand, he's trying to step up as a team leader. On the other, he's blowing off steam by playing the drums and playing them well. Like, this dude could play. He's actually a good musician. So, maybe Kirksey is the guy that we should have been sort of keyed in on before this show instead of Garrett. Who knows? But Garrett is a colorful and intelligent young man. I'm looking forward to seeing more about him.
And Kirksey, of course, an underrated, a lesser-known player, and now we're finding out for the first time about those skills behind the kit. Guys, lastly, because we all watched it, we probably all have a take on it. Jarvis Landry's speech, epic, regardless of how which way you view it. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. Is that leadership? Is that someone stepping in too soon and coming on a little too strong? What did each of you think about him kind of taking over that wide receiver room and letting it be known how he felt about players missing practice without serious injuries?
Yeah, I mean, Dan, it was kind of a more impassioned version of what Todd Haley and Hugh Jackson were arguing about, which is, why do we have so many guys taking days off? We're an 0-16 team. We were 1-15 the year before. This thing is not going to turn itself around. So I understand the sentiment of it. I wonder, would that speech have happened had there not been Hard Knocks cameras there? I don't know. But Jarvis Landry, they had a great edit of it where they said, he's explaining, that's not really me. I'm not really an outspoken guy. Well, he came strong and sent a message to his fellow receivers, one of which, isn't there anymore in Corey Coleman. He got traded. But, yeah, it's just fascinating. I don't know.
Somewhere in there, we also saw a glimpse of a couple players standing on the sideline, acknowledging the fact that Hugh Jackson was looking at him, and it was almost inaudible. They were whispering it to each other because he's like, I know he's looking at me, and I think Hugh Jackson at some point said something along the lines of, you guys are standing over there having a tea party, and it's in this franchise, when you have lost as many games as this team has lost in the last 2 seasons, somebody has to get fired up like that. And I wouldn't doubt that there's going to be more of that, because the mentality needs to shift on this team, and these guys need to believe that they're going to win in any way possible. Arthur, what do you got?
And look, I believe one of those dudes was Denzel Ward, the number 4 overall pick, not named Bradley Chubb. Remember, at the time of that selection, a lot of people wondered, they surprised a lot of folks by not taking Chubb in that spot. Demarius Randall was the other cat. Fascinating stuff. Hugh also tried to very gently nudge Baker Mayfield to getting an earlier start to his days alongside Tyrod Taylor, asking Baker why he wasn't, there burning I guess up first thing in the morning is a better way of putting it. Baker didn't have much of a response. So I'm sure that's another kind of theme we'll be following in this season, and it really is off to a terrific start, Dan.
A couple other just fun little things that they showed but didn't really talk much on. One was right at the beginning. You saw Nick Chubb just standing around there waiting for his bags while like 3 people came to pick up Baker Mayfield. And I think you see that distinction between the first round pick and how much they were giving him the VIP treatment, and Nick Chubb standing there just annoyed that people were asking him these questions. They barely knew who he was, and nobody was there to help him with his bags or anything like that. I loved the bless him, Jarvis Landry bless him segment, and just seeing him telling that to everyone and then explaining why he's using that term, and also the powerful message I think at the very beginning as well, with LeBron's banner coming down and really establishing this is the Brown city to win over. LeBron is gone. I don't think there's really any focus any longer on the Cavaliers, and I'm sure Cavaliers fans will say, shut up to me on this side. But, I think that this really is, the Browns city to take over and to really, maybe get their own banner put up onto that building as the city's favorite.
Yeah, I mean, if they get second place in the AFC North this season, I think they deserve that banner. I mean, they still have a long way to go, but I'm encouraged by this team, and you can see the difference between last year's roster and this year's. They have made improvements, and they have added reinforcements. They have two quarterbacks. Look at the way Tyrod Taylor performed Thursday night. Look at the way Baker Mayfield performed Thursday night. When was the last time we could say we're actually encouraged by the performance of two Browns quarterbacks? In it's early, but still, there's something being built here, and maybe that building facade will get their Browns banner at some point. And you're right, it's just a critical time in the city's mental sports well-being, I guess, and this is going to be just so much fun to watch out.
Arthur, any other final takes on this week's episode?
Not really, but I think it makes for a good segue if we want to talk a little bit about the Browns preseason opener, because it couldn't have been more exciting. So I know we'll go there next, but yeah, good call on the symbolism at the top. There's never a perfect time, I think, to watch the prodigal son of the city leave, but at least the Browns finally seem to be creating some positive, vibes or whatever for the first time in forever, just as LeBron breaks everyone's hearts by disappearing.
Well, Arthur, I'm glad you mentioned that segue. I do want to get to some of the first preseason games that were played this week and kind of get your guys' takes on a few storylines that stood out to you. And Arthur, let's start with you. I mean, what are some of the things that you recognized that really stood out in these opening preseason games?
Well, Eric just alluded to it. The Browns have not one but two quarterbacks now, and that is something, obviously, for this organization. Tyrod Taylor came in. He's known as the more conservative dude, but perfect 5 for 5, a perfect passer rating of 158.3 in his two series, and he puts the exclamation point on it with a pretty pass down the seam for a touchdown to David Njoku. So a good mix. You didn't see Tyrod have to use his legs much yet. We know he can do that, but good to see him push the ball downfield a little bit in his Browns debut. Then Baker comes out there, and that's all he's doing is pushing the ball downfield. This dude is looking for the big play at all times, and that might have been the most encouraging aspect of his debut for me. It's his ability to be in and out of the pocket sense and the pocket presence to avoid trouble, but always still to be looking downfield. That's something that you can't teach and that young players don't normally have right out of the gate. So Baker had some big-time conversions, a 3rd and 18, a 4th and 2, did it with his arm and his legs, and just really exciting stuff. And Eric, what about this burgeoning rapport, it appears, with Antonio Callaway? I can't remember what round the controversial rookie out of Florida went in, but it looks like that dude is going to command an early role as explosive and as athletic as he is.
Yeah, special talent. Everybody, knew about him in 2016 in Florida. He didn't play last season in college football because of multiple off-the-field incidents, and there was also a positive drug test from the combine. So it was terrible timing for him to get pulled over with probably what's a minor offense in the big picture, possession of marijuana in his car, a very small amount. But the fact that he didn't tell the team about it, just showed up to practice and acted as if everything was cool, is not the kind of maturity that they're hoping for him. But the play on the field, it was obvious. I mean, his talent, they traded up for him in round 4, probably would have been a top 50 selection had he had no, red flags character-wise. So, everyone's known about him. He's got some Deshaun Jackson-like juice. I don't know if he's quite that type of, take the top off the defense guy, but he has got some real fire to him as a player. He's a little bit small, but if he can keep his nose clean and convince the coaches that he's accountable, this is absolutely one of their 3 best weapons on offense, and that's assuming Josh Gordon is there.
Yeah, it's a 57-yard touchdown early in the 4th quarter from Baker to Callaway, a catch and run. Good stuff. David Njoku had 2 touchdowns, 1 each from Tyrod and Baker, so very encouraging start to his sophomore season. And there was a funny sort of anecdote before the game, and that Dez Bryant, apparently, John Dorsey said he's interested in visiting with Dez if Dez will return his phone calls. Dorsey says he's not heard from him. Dez said he's going to start taking his visits next week, and the Browns are at the top of the list. I'm wondering in my head, if the Browns feel like they can count on Josh Gordon, if this is going to be the David Njoku they have in year 2, even after trading Corey Coleman, do they really need Dez Bryant? I'm not so sure. But I guess that certainly it would beef up Hard Knocks to another level. That's for sure. As this summer continues, we'll have to follow what happens with Bryant and the Browns.
Yeah, I think they're interested at a certain level. I mean, obviously, if the financial demands are too high, it's probably not going to be something they're interested in. But you figure Landry in the slot, Callaway on one side, Dez on the other. Don't forget, Dez Bryant is a ferocious run blocker too. They've got Carlos Hyde, Nick Chubb, Duke Johnson as well. I could see it making some sense. If Dez is going to expect to catch 85 balls for 1,200 yards, it's not going to happen. I just don't see it, But after that, the depth really does seem to drop off. You've got Coleman traded. You've got, Jeff Janis, Rashard Higgins. I can't think of too many other guys who have a real shot of making this team if Brian is on board. So, he'd kind of be that number 2/number 3 guy, and it might make some sense if, it also, like you said, would crank up the volume on Hard Knocks, make this a fascinating team personality-wise, and, just so many interesting characters all of a sudden.
Guys, on the opposite side of the ball, you got Saquon Barkley's opening 39-yard run on his first carry, plus avoiding 3 tackles, which, in my opinion, that was fun to watch. Arthur?
Yeah, no question about it. Just made someone look silly in the backfield, and then made Demarius Randall look even worse as he got the corner on him. Randall was not ready and took a really bad angle. But I thought, Eric, we were exchanging messages on Slack last night as we were writing, and he really hit the nail on the head. Barkley is a guy who can go 100 yards on any play. I think he said go 108 or whatever he did at the Combine. But his other 5 carries last night went for a combined 5 yards. So still has a little bit of that all-or-nothing reputation he's going to have to shake. Eric, what else did you take away from Barkley and maybe Will Hernandez, what we saw from the Giants?
Yeah, I mean, that Barkley was in college. You'd watch him. He'd have a 1-yard run, a 3-yard run, a -1, a 10-yard run, a 1-yard run, and then he'd break a 60-yarder. And that's what he was. He was a home run hitter. I mean, that's what I think is gonna be in the NFL too. And we saw that a little bit from guys like, Kenyon Drake last season, and Leonard Fournette was that guy last year. He had a couple of 90-yard runs, and his rushing average was still relatively low. So obviously, it's going to be imperative for him to get those 7- and 8-yard gains, or turn a 1-yard gain into a 5-yard gain and those kind of runs. But there's no question when he sees daylight, he is a special, special player. I just think there has to be this, he's going to bat about 225, but his slugging percentage is going to be through the roof. That makes, a little baseball metaphor there. And that's kind of the player he was at Penn State too at times.
And what's going to help him, obviously, guys, is being on the same field with Odell, Evan Ingram, Sterling Shepard. Defenses are not going to be able to put 8 dudes in the box regularly because then they're just going to get burned by one of these other guys. So I imagine that's going to help his efficiency a little bit. But, yeah, it'll be fun to track him and see if he can improve that efficiency and also still have those big plays.
Eric, how about any other storylines coming out of some of these other games we saw earlier this week?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest ones for me football-wise was Andrew Luck and his return to the field, and, led 2 scoring drives, was out there for 15, 16 plays, whatever it was. And, the best thing about it, I mean, did he have 7-step drops and chuck the ball all over the place? No, but we saw some important stuff. They went empty, and gave him a 5-man protection. That shows a level of trust from Frank Reich that, okay, we can let our quarterbacks see a little pressure and not be scared of it. On one play, Andrew Luck dropped back, scrambled, got hit by Bobby Wagner, one of the best linebackers in the league, popped right up and looked, no different than he did before the hit. So those are great signs if you're a Colts fan. 6-9 passing, looked to be in rhythm, especially that first drive. I thought it looked really good. So, that was to me, an A-plus beginning for what we saw out of Andrew Luck. And yet it's about step number 4 out of 28. I mean, he's still got a long way to go. But if you keep stacking productive practices, good preseason, performances where he's not getting hurt. That's outstanding. He got hit on the shoulder, too. This is the shoulder that has given him all this trouble and caused him to not play real football games for almost 600 days. So I thought that was huge. Deshaun Watson got his feet wet last night as well, Thursday night. So there was a lot of good news health-wise. Couple of, we saw Darius Geis get hurt. He looks to be okay, we think. A couple other players. But for the most part, Thursday night didn't provide much in the way of bad injury news, and especially for guys like Andrew Luck.
How about you, Arthur?
Yeah, that was a good summary for sure. Just a couple of the other young quarterbacks and new offenses. It sounds like Marcus Mariota fared pretty well the first time out there with under Mike Vrabel, and of course the cat that comes over from the Rams, whose name is for some reason escaping me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Sounded like that was a good first glimpse of Mariota in that offense, and then Pat Mahomes I think did okay. Andy Dalton shredded the Bears' first-team offense with Bill Lazor's kind of recalibrated attack there, and on the flip side, Mitch Trubisky and the Bears' first-team offense didn't look so good at all. But these will be things we're gonna want to continue to track. Dak Prescott looked pretty good. That's the same offense, but it was a good start for him in a very small sample size. So just watching how guys are assimilating in new schemes or with their new playmakers, I think is what it's all about in the preseason, beyond staying healthy, of course. And then just one more feel-good rookie story, Shaquem Griffin. I mean, if people are going to get tired of this, then that's too bad, because I'm going to keep talking about it. It is just absolutely amazing. The kid had a game-high 9 tackles last night, played a bunch, and everyone knows the story at this point. The Central Florida one-handed linebacker, the Seahawks draft him and pair him with his twin brother, Shaquille, draft him in round 5, and he looks like he's going to have an early role, and who better to learn behind them, Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, and on Pete Carroll in that defense. Just I think a really good landing spot for Shaquem and a really good first introduction on the NFL stage.
A couple other things that I had on my list that I took notice last night or Thursday nights in Thursday night's games. The first one would be the Kyle Fuller pick 6 against Andy Dalton, and I think we talked about this several times over on the PFW Chicago podcast, in that this Bears secondary is really shining. Pretty bright, and for the first time in several years, I think that it's fun to get excited about a Bears secondary, and to see Kyle Fuller have that pick 6 and return it. That was fantastic. And then as an NIU guy, to see Green Bay Packers running back Joel Bonio to rush for a 1-yard touchdown during Thursday night's preseason matchup with the Titans, and then go in and do a Lambeau leap. Again, it was just for 1 yard, but it was a sort of a feel-good story just from a fellow NIU alum to see that happen as well. So those were just a couple other things that I noticed. Anything else, guys? Any other thoughts from these preseason games?
Well, if we're talking, notable alumni, Marcus Murphy for the Buffalo Bills, I confess I didn't even realize he was still in the league. But, my old Mizzou guy, Murphy, was one of my favorite players there. He had a nice night. And speaking of the Packers, Tim Boyle, the quarterback up there, we talk about obviously Aaron Rodgers, but, really it's going to come down to who's going to win between Hundley and Deshaun Kaiser. They have a 4th quarterback there by the name of Tim Boyle. If you would have asked me 2 years ago if Tim Boyle had any shot of making the NFL, having watched him at UConn, he once went 13 games between passing touchdowns. I mean, you can't do that. He had 2 at his preseason debut. He threw for 130 yards, granted, against 3rd and 4th stringers. But, I mean, I was just shocked that, A, he was even in the NFL, and, B, that he played as well as he did. So I was wrong, Tim. Good job on you.
Anytime we want to say that preseason football is meaningless, I think those were great examples, guys. The Lambeau leap from the NIU alum and Tim Doyle, this might be the only chance a lot of these players get. And that makes for great stories too, just watching them either seize the opportunity or whatever else might happen. Preseason football can be entertaining too. I think we're finding that out.
Well, guys, that'll do it for this week's edition of the Pro Football Weekly podcast. Of course, there's a few more games this week that we'll probably touch on next week. We have a few event reminders, guys. I know that Eric and Arthur know all about these. We want to let you all know about them. The first one being August 27th. If you are in the Chicago area, we are having a live remote event, which will be on Facebook Live as well out at La Barra Restaurant. So that's La Barra Restaurant, 3011 Butterfield Road in Oak Brook, Illinois. That will be at 6 p.m., and there'll be a fantasy draft party where guests will host their fantasy drafts after the broadcast. So come on out for great food and drink there. Our whole Pro Football Weekly crew will be out there. So if you're in the Chicago area, come on out and check that out. And as we've been talking for the last couple weeks, we have a huge event coming up Saturday, September 8th at the Rouse Center for the Arts in Crystal Lake, Illinois. Join Pro Football Weekly for Football Legends Live, presented by Rum Chadas and Syntegra Health System. It'll feature Pro Football Hall of Famers Brian Urlacher, Mean Joe Green, Lawrence Taylor, Anthony Munoz, Randy White, and Dan Hampton, along with MCs Pat Boyle and Dave Kaplan, plus the Pro Football Weekly crew like Arthur and Eric. The tickets are on sale now at profootballweekly.com, so be sure to get yours today. As always, a big thanks to Humphreys McGee for the use of our theme song, Out of Order. You can find them on iTunes, so go and check them out as well. I want to thank you once again for listening, and for Eric Edholm and Arthur Arkish, I'm Dan Mott, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care, everyone.